5 people and rising. So I think we're ready to begin. We're super excited to have 3 wonderful speakers with us here today. Stella Nyanzi, Andreas Grarup Nielsen, and Kaime Villaria, who will be discussing digital direct action, how ordinary people can get power on the internet. But before we start the discussion, we also have some new tools to share with you and a little bit about Beautiful Trouble. So I will hand over to Nadine, who is going to share a little more about that. Just a second.
Yeah, thanks, Darya. So delighted to be here. My name's Nadine Block, and as I'm introducing myself, we'll go to a screen share so you can have a little visual to go with the introduction on Beautiful Trouble. I'm calling in from Piscataway, Nacotchunk territory outside of Washington, D.C., as part of the Beautiful Trouble, diffuse collection of folks from all over the planet, and we welcome you all here today. So just to start us off, what is Beautiful Trouble? We are a group dedicated to creative tools for a more just world. We're a collection of artists, activists, organizers, trainers, facilitators, and lots of people in between who are committed to making revolution irresistible, as 𝗏𝗏 has written. And we have everything from books written to an online toolbox. We conduct trainings and jam sessions. We provide study guides, and we even have a card deck. So we have a great big world that we invite you to share with us by clicking through later at your leisure into the creative toolbox and sharing the wisdom from hundreds of activists all over the world. Now, the thing about Beautiful Trouble is that we start with stories like many other groups, but we don't end there. Our superpower is to actually tease out the lessons and the learnings so that we can increase accessibility and help support more effective activism all over the world, no matter where you are. So if we look at the next slide, you can see how Beautiful Trouble is organized, whether it's in our slides here today, or whether it's on our toolkit online, or in our books, or on our card deck. We are organized by teasing out from the stories, the theories, the principles, the tactics that actually build more innovative activism and help. This is the way that we can help activists identify the things that are effective and then make sure that they fit in their own context. This is also one of the reasons why we have as many of our materials as possible in multiple languages so that you can use them more effectively wherever you are. So one more thing that I'll mention about today's session before we go on and hear from Stella, Kaime, Andreas, and Darya is in the next slide. And that is to remind us that even though today we're talking about sexy things like tactics and implementation of strategy plans, the key thing here is that you use your tactics in service of your bigger vision. So that even though maybe you don't use a strategic pyramid quite like this one here, but hopefully you use some kind of strategic planning so that you keep your vision and your purpose or mission in your mind's eye as you figure out the goals for your campaigns. And that way we know that our tactics will deliver the change that we so badly need and that we struggle for. So I'm going to end up by saying thank you to everyone involved. Thank you to our speakers. Thanks for folks who are joining us. You can find Beautiful Trouble online, in print, on cards, in person. And we really welcome you to use all of our materials. They're Creative Commons, share and share alike. And welcome to our digital tools roundtable, talking about how ordinary people can build power on the internet. So I'll turn it back over to you, Darya, and welcome everyone to this session.
Great, thank you, Nadine. And Nadine is Beautiful Trouble's super ETC, executive training conductor. I'd like to now hand over to Phil, who is going to share some exciting new tools.
Hello, everyone from Uganda. You know, just when this event was about to start, my electricity went down. So somehow that feels meta and relevant to this thing that we've gathered here to do today together. I got my candles over here, you know, so I'm just gonna switch off my video and try to just give you a little brief background about what this is and why we came to do it. So, of course, during the pandemic, there has been this shift to digital activism. It's still, you know, possible for us to creatively be in the streets, being engaged in resistance, but increasingly difficult. And this has turned our attention largely to the digital terrain. And of course, this is the new craze, right? Across, you know, not just for activism, but for, you know, all kind of like industries and communities around the world. And so Beautiful Trouble has been receiving a lot of requests for digital activism tools. And we haven't been able to like easily point to already existing resources online that really center disruptive action, the principles of disruption and civil disobedience and direct action that we usually take to the streets with us when it comes to digital activism. And so we teamed up with some of the toughest comrades we could find on the internet, and we're trying to bring some of these tools to you in a centralized place and help make digital activism more accessible, not just for, you know, the techies and the nerds among us, who of course are, you know, really essential to our struggle, but not all of us are them. So we want to, you know, develop tools that are accessible, that you don't need, you know, an IT degree in order to exercise them. So Ray, could we show folks how to actually access these tools before we get into discussing everything that's on our agenda today? So if you go to beautifultrouble.org, you'll see a little link to the toolbox. And if you click that, that will take you to our toolbox, which has hundreds of tools, hundreds of stories, tactics, principles, theories, and methodologies from struggles around the world across all continents. And at the top right, you will find something called sets. So these are little groupings of tools that we identify that relate to a particular theme. So go ahead and click that, Ray, and you will see on the far left a set for digital activism. And this has something like 16 or 17 tools, many of them new tools that we've recently developed, you know, color-coded according to theory, tactic, and so on, for you guys to peruse. And go ahead and click Glitch Feminism, Ray, just so folks can see what it looks like when you actually dig into a particular tool. So when you click on the tool, you'll see like a deeper, you know, kind of full write-up. You can learn about it, learn instances around the world of where that tool has been applied, read more about real world examples and other, you know, there are links that point to other places on the internet where you can get more details about that particular tool. So maybe what we can do is introduce you to one new tool that's been developed in concert with ActionAid Denmark, who has been really supportive and involved in this undertaking. So I want to actually pass the microphone to Andreas to tell us about the movement Compass, which is a new tool that we developed with him and his colleagues to help you know, organizers around the world strategize for the particular moment that they're in, identify the particular moment that they're in, and strategize for it. Andreas, over to you.
Hello, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be allowed to be here with all of you, and it is a true pleasure to be able to share some of the stuff we've been working on the last couple of years. As Phil said, my name is Andreas. I'm working for ActionAid Denmark, an INGO, and we do a lot of activist stuff and support a lot of activists around the world. And luckily, I'm one of those myself also. And we've been collecting a lot of stories about movements, organizing, how change happens, and updated 𝗶𝗵𝗺𝗪's movement cycle in collaboration with, amongst others, this beautiful collective. So I'll just share my screen. And you should all be able to see the movement compass, which is here a non-interactive piece because we wanted it to load properly, but you can access the beautiful Trouble webpage after this, where you can go through the different phases we have here. And the amazing thing about this tool is that it will help you out if you're part of the social movement or if you're supporting a social movement to figure out what are the needs based on where the movement are currently right now. Because a lot of the requests we see coming in for different forms of support depends a lot of the context, not only the national context, but also where a movement is in its maturity. Because a movement that are facing an enduring crisis, looking for a window of opportunity to act, to get people engaged, will have a need for different support than a movement that had its first big victory and are now facing the backlash of government to take away the movement's power. And if we as supporters, friends, allies of these movements go in and tell them, hey, this worked great for us, but it worked great in a different phase than they are in, we are actually getting them to spend energy, or we are ourselves spending energy on something that is irrelevant for the current struggle we are facing. When you go into Beautiful Trouble and click any of these phases, you will get asked a question. And if that question looks like where you see your movement are right now, you can go on and you will get curated tools that we suggest that you use for your movement right now where you are from the Beautiful Trouble universe to help you overcome the adversities you might face. Of course, if you are in the contraction phase, and it's a good idea to look at the previous phases to see if any of those tools might have been missed, if you forgot to look at the spectrum of allies to identify your friends and enemies, if you forgot to figure out your campaign message, both internal and external one, or similar things. This is right now in a beta. We are updating the back end of this continuously with more information to get it more exact. And of course, when we do stuff like this, it's a generalization. So don't take it as the 10 demands, but I mean, at least it is something to help both those of us with a lot of experience and those of us that are still figuring out how changing the world works. Thank you, Darya and Phil.
Thank you, Andreas, for that. Just a second, I'm pulling up my screen. So yeah, now I think we're ready to start the discussion. And as I introduce our speakers, we'd also like to check in with everyone on their digital direct action experience. So you should be finding a poll popping up right about now. Please go ahead and drop your answers in. And I'd like to start by introducing Stella Nyanzi. She is a Ugandan human rights advocate, poet, medical anthropologist, feminist, queer rights advocate, and scholar of sexuality, family planning, and public health. She's been imprisoned because of her digital radical rudeness, which has sparked movements. It's great to have you with us here today, Stella. Next, I'd like to introduce 𝗏𝗏 𝗏𝗏, who joins us from May 1st Movement Technology. As part of May 1st, 𝗏𝗏 provides technical support to members, assists with server administration, and coordinates member participation in their technology team. For the past 10 years, 𝗏𝗏 has worked at the intersection of technology and social movements with a focus on creating autonomous spaces for learning and sharing about information technology, free software, and digital security. And finally, Andreas, who we've just heard from. Andreas 𝗝𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗔 is an activist working with activism and organizing internationally for ActionAid, and his key competencies lie with organizing, direct action, security, and training. Thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to invite you to turn on your cameras, please. And we will just do some spotlighting. Great. And Kaime, are you with us?
I'm here.
Great. Getting a hang of this spotlighting. Great. Interest. Cool. If I can ask you all to also just say a few words about the work that you do and a little bit more about you that I may have missed. Hello?
Let's hear from one person at a time. That would be great. So go ahead and call on people.
Yep. Stella, can you hear me? Can you hear us well?
Yes, yes. Sorry, I
Super.
disappeared for a minute. Hi, guys. My name is Stella 𝗏𝗏𝗍𝗔. You introduced me perfectly. I'm an activist and an academic. I use digital tools more and more in perhaps not very technical ways. My sort of criticality is with language. And I'm trying to speak to power in a space where those that hold power abuse it, but they pretend to be deaf, not to hear the plight of a number of minority population groups. And so what I have done is to restyle language, really, and speak in ways that are sometimes labeled rude and impolite, but at least I've been able to get the attention of people who hold power using language creatively and publishing what I do on social media, specifically Facebook. So I'm a Facebooker more than any other thing. Is that good enough?
That's great. Thank you, Stella. And Kaime, over to you. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and the work that you do and where you sit in the digital terrain?
Yes, thanks, Daria. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaime. I'm here in Oaxaca, in Mexico, and I work with May First Movement Technology. I think the work that I'm doing is very technical, but it comes from a history, a kind of a rich history of movement appropriation of the available communications tools. And I think it's really important. I think compared to some of the other things in the toolbox, this is a very long-term direct action. It takes place over a long period of time, but it's really important for us to be taking control of our information, of our communication, and our data at this time.
Thank you, Kaime. Andres, over to you.
Thank you, and a pleasure to be here. And as you mentioned, I'm an activist, and I'm working with activists for ActionAid, which gets me in contact with a lot of interesting people with a lot of progressive practices across the globe, and a bunch of those are on different issues of direct action, both the legal and the illegal parts. We are talking about both the DDoSing, defacing, setting up for relays and so on, which is the more not that illegal stuff, and then the rest of it. And even though I'm not a techie myself, I kind of understand what they're talking about, and those experiences and that part of the network, along with the very physical frontline network of myself, my own experience, and all the amazing activists we work with, allow us to try to combine those ends so that the digital tools end up amplifying the activism, the work that we do, instead of focusing solely on the physical or the digital space.
Great, thank you, Andres. And I guess let's dive straight in. Digital direct action, put simply, what does that look like to you all? And this is open, so we can just get a discussion going.
If it's okay, I'll chip in and try not to talk over the two other amazing people here. So I think a very real example, recent example of what direct action is in the digital sphere is in Zimbabwe, when the internet was turned off back in 2017, and atrocities against the civilian population started happening in the darkness of the turned out of net. A collective called Anonymous Africa got together and they DDoSed all the banks of the regime and closed the money flow with the demand of them turning on the internet so the world could view what happened in Zimbabwe. And I mean, that is a very real use of direct action in all its form. It's not just speaking about it, getting publicity through media around what you're doing, but it's an action that directly affects the real world. I think that at least for me is the easiest way to explain it.
Kaime and Stella, what about you? How would you, in a very simple terms, explain direct action online?
Right. So maybe if I may, I think that for me, who is not a technocrat, I'm not an IT person. I think that how I understand digital direct action is really when there's an issue that needs intervention in contexts where we can no longer go physically to the street because of police repression and penalization, that some of the sort of gatherings we've had have been online. The fundraisings we've done have been online. And I think for me, crowdsourcing for funds is one of the most important direct actions in regimes such as the one I live in Uganda, where a lot of resistance funds are monitored, surveilled, tracked, and then criminalized. And so funding becomes difficult. But then funding via online channels for protest activities and resistance work is one of the more direct forms of action. And it may not be to the magnitude of attacking or confronting a regime, a government, the state, but it's crowdsourcing and raising funds and creating spaces for gathering that would not happen elsewhere, that would not be allowed to happen in a punitive regime. And so I think for me that, it's still a spectrum from a grassroots, more community organic sort of ways in which we too can participate in direct action using digital tools and techniques.
Yeah, I'd like to cite maybe a more historical example, at least in like the more shallow roots of what we do now at May 1st. In the early 90s, that people began to realize that the internet could be an alternative communications means to get information out about their movements, about local struggles, about oppression happening locally. And at that time, there was no way to do that. There was no media coverage outside of it. There was no accurate media coverage of what was happening for local struggles. So that was a very powerful tool to directly take communications into our own hands as movements. And in the late 90s, we saw things like the Indie Media Network emerge. And that's kind of like the place where autonomous servers get started, where people begin to learn about this technology. It was easier to get involved at that time, I thought, but people began to learn and take control of it and set up their own servers. Even if you didn't know about it, there was information that could be found online to get started, and to have a direct participation and to be able to, this whole idea of self-publishing, of putting information online directly and making it available to the wider world and calling attention to your movements and to connecting to other movements and everything that was happening worldwide. It was very disruptive at the time. It was a form of directly getting your information out there, directly taking control of your own media. And what happens afterwards is very terrible in the way that the capitalist investors who realize the value of personal information and realize the value of our data that we're sharing begin to invest billions of dollars to these corporate platforms that basically take over all of that activity of self-publishing and of putting yourself out online. And that changes the meaning of what it means for movements to take control of their own technology and take control of their own communications in the future. And that, I think that brings us to where we are now, and the importance of what that means in terms of protecting our data from surveillance and from the commodification and from the manipulation of our communications by corporate entities and by the state. So I think, that brings us to the current point. I mean, I could talk more about that, but I mean, I think that's a general introduction to where I'm coming from with this.
Thanks, Jaime. And it would be great to continue with that, actually. And, data is power. Internet is filled with data. So could you speak a little bit more about that as well? The capture and control of our data by tech corporations, state governments, law enforcement, and what that means, and how to approach that, how to deal with that.
Right. So, I mean, as humans, we're naturally communicative beings, and as the internet, not everyone in the world has access to it, but as more and more people are able to gain access online, naturally we seek out communicating with others, and for those of us supporting our local movements, we're attempting to bring attention to our movements and seek out connections with others. The value of personal data as a kind of raw commodity. These corporations and these investor capitalists caught on to this very quickly and began to pour just billions of dollars into the potential of capturing that data and using it. And one of the simplest ways they use it is to try to make online advertising more directed and more targeted. And it's one of the simple dumb ways that they use capturing our data and surveilling us. But I think their aspirations are much deeper than that, and they literally call this data mining. The way they take our personal information, everything we say, everything we express, and anything that might tell them about who we are, and the way they shape that and turn that into a more refined product that they can sell elsewhere. And then their cooperation with state law enforcement gives access to the state a kind of surveillance, a kind of detail at an unprecedented level, and a wider net that they can track so many people all at the same time in an automated way, in ways that they didn't have accessible to them before. So the cooperation of these corporate platforms with the state really creates this surveillance state that we could only imagine before. And so it's been really a big boon to oppressive states and oppressive regimes to be able to control populations and target activists and human rights activists and independent journalists all over the world. And more recently, we start to see the way that those information flows, they can even take the information, what they know about us, and play with that and push buttons and attempt to manipulate us, to shape public opinion, to affect the outcomes of elections, to basically just manipulate the information that's out there about our movements in new ways. And so a big part of what we're doing at May 1st is asking our movements to collectively think about what should we be doing about this? How should we think about technology? Is the internet a viable place for organizing? How should we use it? And one of our ideas is that yes, this is a viable space for organizing. This is something that we should take into our own hands, but we need to do it our way. It needs to be under our control. It needs to be designed by us in a big way. So part of what May 1st does is attempt to make communications tools available we're a membership organization with members primarily in the US and in Mexico. And we try to make communications tools directly available to our members. And these tools we administer ourselves, and we make sure they're free of any kind of surveillance and we don't share people's information. And we will actively defend against any attempt by the state to request that information from us.
Thanks, Kaime. And this reminds me of the work that Andreas is doing with Turtle Web. Andreas, would you like to share a little bit more about that? I saw that there's the link in the chat for anyone who'd like to learn more, but it would be great to know how you started it up and how people can access and use this.
Yeah, sure. And this is also building a bit on the owning our own infrastructure, but on a bit of a different scale, because using cell phone networks and data is incredibly expensive in some nations where there's a monopoly or where the cell phone companies work closely with the regimes and where corruption and bribery is part of the business models, which means that many of our friend and allies and fellow activists find it impossible to buy data to stay connected to their networks. And some of us living, me from Denmark, when I run out of data, my net gets slower, but I don't lose all contact to the rest of the world, which is not the case in many other countries. And at the start of the COVID, we got some people stranded on the outskirts in Morocco, and they ran out of funds and they ran out of a way to figure out how to get funds on their phones. And at a visit to the city where they got Wi-Fi, they figured out that they could use an old iodine system for Androids and TikTok to actually get access to an internet. And they got in touch with we talked about it, and we figured out there were some apps that were created for this kind of stuff that were paid, but we could figure out how to make that for ourselves, so they could figure out how to make it for us. So I'll just screen share shortly, and hopefully this will, let's see here. Hopefully you can see the Turtle Web. Yeah, sure. So what we ended up with is a quite simple app. For now, it's just for Android. And the tech lingo is it creates a VPN tunnel over the DNS. And that's a lot of noise for many of you, but basically it uses a very slow unencrypted band to connect with your internet service provider that is not closed off. And we can make the traffic look like the carrier signal to your internet service provider, which allows you really slow internet, but you can send messages over most chat services, Signal, WhatsApp, Messenger, stuff like that. And you can send pictures. Voice messages are taking a ton of time to download, and direct voice calls out of the picture. But we didn't create it to voice messages and all that. We created it for the millions and billions of people out here in the world that cannot access data on a daily basis. And this way they can stay connected to each other in emergencies or when planning actions without having to spend all their savings on it. You just need to download it while you are on data or on a Wi-Fi, and then when you run out of data, you will have access to the internet. If you have data, as you can see in the middle screenshot here, you will still use your data on the phone. So don't turn it on. You will get a warning if you have data on your phone. But if you are at 0 funds on your phone, you will get the green screen, and you'll be connected to your internet service provider. It's part of breaching the digital divide, reaching out to those that have incredible expensive data packages, but it's also we're also working on encrypting it, so it'll provide further protection. As state of the line VPNs, we'll get that done before Christmas, which means that if you use this and Signal, you will be pretty safe anywhere in the world, unless somebody gets a hold of your phones. Yeah, that's like the crash course in the Turtle Web. It can be downloaded now, and I'll share a link in the chat so you can all go and download it.
That is awesome, Andreas. Thank you. And yeah, I would like to look into that next. Stella, inviting you in here as well you've mentioned the use of digital tools for online gathering, for fundraising, but you've also spoken of times where respectable modes of communication are no longer listened to or heard by those in power in repressive regimes, and the need to devise creative means of speaking truth to power. Can you tell us about maybe one such creative action that you've carried out online using digital tools, and maybe the risks you've faced in doing so, and how you've mitigated these?
Right. So, I mean, I celebrate the creator of 𝗏𝗏 because where I am, there came a point where we needed to have software that allows us to be undetectable by the police when the police is surveilling one's online presence and has committed spies. It's important to have tools and software such as applications, they're called, such as 𝗏𝗏. But to answer your question, in Uganda, where I live, we have a dictator who's been in power for 36 years. And as movement activists involved in resistance to all forms of dictatorial, repressive, authoritarian oppression, organize and mobilize and innovate, I think that the government grows more and more deaf. And a lot of the work we do as activists cannot be published in the public media. We cannot hold conferences to discuss dissidents of any form. And so I think that for me, those of us who are targeted and labeled as anti-government, anti-regime agents, it's very difficult to get our voices in the public, the normative, dominant public media channels. And so what I did was to turn to Facebook. I saw that one of the people in the chat has asked about the possibilities of using Facebook and Twitter to speak truth to power. And what I did was not to speak in the respectable language of diplomats and advocates and most other conventional activists, and instead took to rudeness because the government was not listening to polite talk, right? So I used existent platforms. I used Facebook, which is easily accessible. The level of surveillance then was not so much. And I began writing subversive poetry directly to the president and the president's wife and the president's son. So the first family, really. Poetry that I mixed with sexually graphic language, which is not everybody's cup of tea, but it got an audience by shaming the regime sycophants, the holders of oppressive power, using sexually graphic language in a very conservative, Christianized, religious, cultural context, got the attention of the regime. Now, the problem with that, I think that when Kaime was speaking, he talked about data being powerful and data mining, that the state also goes to the internet to investigate and surveil activists. And what was done then was appointment of government employed members of the cyber crimes unit in Uganda to focus on what sort of activities I was doing online. I was still very naive and ignorant about the levels of criminalization that the state can go to. And one day I wrote about the president and called him a pair of buttocks and, created a laugh and a star. And many people laughed at the president and a few threatened me. Unknown to me, the government had actually begun prosecution processes and was arrested for my activities online. I think that I'm one of the few lucky Ugandans who's been arrested, not once, but a few times. I've been charged twice in court for cyber harassment and offensive communication against the president of Uganda. In the first case, I was campaigning for sanitary pads for girls online, and that's where the crowdfunding came in. A person who knows how to work with GoFundMe, and they were living in the States, set up a GoFundMe page, and we were able to raise about 10,000 sanitary pads that we freely distributed in the local countryside, in spite of the president failing to do this. And then I was arrested, and that activity was criminalized, and I was accused of mental illness. The government, because I wanted to know the dangers of some of the activities we do, the state prosecutors during my first trial applied for the courts to subject me to involuntary mental examination, because they argued that for anybody to speak critically about a powerful dictator, they'd have to be mentally ill. I was arrested a year later after being released on bail and accused of the same, or charged with the same crime of cyber harassment and offensive communication against the president, when I wrote a poem, this time a poem that used, again, sexually graphic language to criticize the excesses and failures and violations of the government. And that time I did not apply for bail, but I was prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to 18 months in prison. And so I think for me that the internet is very useful, but in repressive regimes, it can also be criminalized, and our activity is not only surveilled. I think that our activities can also get us into trouble, because the regimes that are oppressive are also creatively coming up with computer use laws that have tried, in the case of Uganda, to go beyond the Ugandan jurisdiction. And so in my case, the courts had to determine whether a Ugandan court system was within jurisdiction to try offenses committed on Facebook. If the Facebook community standards are not breached, right, and Facebook protects my right to participate in that community, can the Ugandan jurisdiction laws then catch me? And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's important for us to do our creative resistance work, but there are also consequences that arise from punitive states in repressive regimes.
Thanks, Stella. That's quite some experiences, and very inspiring. And it brings us straight to social media as well. And what do we think about that? Is it instrumental in digital direct action? Is it useful? Does it carry with it a large risk of backlash? And how do we navigate through the digital noise today to use social media in an effective way? I see there's quite some questions as well in the chats around this.
I can try to go first. Yeah. I think it's a bit controversial, so I'm hesitating to be too frank around one viewpoint or the other. So you'll get both and answer from my end at least. I think as the diverse people we are as activists on a global scale, we need to use the tools we have available to turn our resources, if it's root poetry, if it's a big 𝗏𝗎 following, or if it's tech skills, into the power we need to affect the change we want. And of course, social media can be used effectively for that. But as with any other tools or tactics, there's a lot of pitfalls with that. As there would be if you use DDoSing to turn off a bank. I mean, that could also be, that would also have a big backlash. Or if you host servers that creates an infrastructure for activists, and some criminal materials are stored through those servers, right? So it's about managing the risks and the opportunities these platforms provide for you. And of course, they are corporate, they earn money on the interactions that we do through them, which is one of the risks or one of the things we need to be aware of when we choose to use those tools to empower our strategies. So I think, as with anything else we do, we need to look at it with open eyes. And I think we always have these discussions when a new powerful tool comes up. Flash mobs, are they good? Are they bad? Are they just a publicity stunt? Do they affect change, right? That was a discussion 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's no question that that the use of social media can be effective for movements. And just the widespread access to them, the amount of money that they have and investment that they have, that they can be reached, a lot of times in places where there is no other internet access, they are able to insert themselves. They are the access that is available. What can you connect to on the internet? Well, you could connect to Facebook or to Instagram or to whatever. These are WhatsApp, who are they are the tools that are available that people can use. So obviously, movements need to take advantage of what's available to them, and because they're so widely available, it's an effective way to reach lots of people. Well, I think so there's no questioning about that. They can be effective. For us, it's a question of can this work for us in the long term, in the strategy of using the tools that are under the control of these corporations, the state, that a lot of times have direct connections to the oppression that is affecting our local movements. So in ways we don't see that as an effective long-term strategy, and we'd like to think about, and we'd like our movements to think about, well, how do we, what should we be thinking about? What is the technology that we would want, that we would use? What would be, what is necessary for us to do this long term? So in that ways, we dive into providing tools for our members as one expression of that. But I think, as May 1st, we're not, we are invested in providing those tools and in the technical side of things, but we're much more interested in the organizing side of this, in the movement side of this. Is like, how do we go about coming together? How do we go about decision making together, decide what technology we want? How do we create democratic structures, or structures that reflect whatever our movement ideals are, and to go about deciding together collectively what do we actually need our movement in terms of communications, and able to advance our struggles against repression. And so in that sense, that's much more what we're leaning on and looking for. How do we get people to understand what are the alternatives to social media? How can we help our movements understand what are different ways they can use internet communications? What are alternative tools available to them? I think that's the perspective we're taking right now, but definitely we completely understand it and support people using the tools they have available. And if that's social media right now, then.
So maybe shall I just talk about the exclusion? Because currently I'm in a rural part of Uganda, so I'm not even in the capital city. And electricity is a problem, okay? We're talking about data and the internet, but just mere electricity. Food is a problem, right? Housing for some is a problem. And yet these excluded minority poor people are also part of movement buildings. And many times they're organizing in ways totally away from the internet and relying on electricity. And so while I value the empowerment and enabling and gathering and all these things that social media provides for us, I also want to highlight how exclusionary it is, how it is totally inaccessible in terms of access. It's just impossible to even talk about the internet when there's no electricity, and people have to rely on alternative modes of gathering. And so I think for me, in terms of thinking more inclusively in ways that include members of movements who have no access to the same sort of digital capacities that may be in Mexico or Denmark or wherever, or even Kampala city, the capital city of my country, it's always important to realize that there are people who have potential to participate in movement building and have ideas and have techniques and tactics that we're not tapping into if we rely strictly and only exclusively on social media. And I think more and more I'm trying to think of ways of involving those who have no access. So it's just a very small point, but I think it's important because most well, not most, depending on the context, it's possible that the majority, the bulk majority, cannot even begin to have a discussion around using any internet-based tools. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can come in here, because I mean 40% of the global population have access to the internet on a weekly basis, not on a daily basis, right? So we are reaching a maximum of 40% of the global population. So we have to think about how we bridge that divide, not only by relying on these digital tools, and that's why we, especially through work, continuously try to thinking about amplifying our offline impact, our activism with these tools, so they not become the whole thing of them, right? But that also means traveling to rural locations, either with like old school sneakers web networks, having data on some side of sticks and carrying batteries, or figuring out other ways. And we see radio as a return to how we reach large numbers of rurally placed populations, especially under internet shutdowns, because we see last year was the year with like 10 times as many internet shutdowns from regimes than any year before, right? And there's so many different ways to turn off the internet that we can't figure out a permanent solution yet to how to solve that, which means that pirate radio becomes a really good solution on how to communicate with rural populations, and of course satellite phones, if the funds are available for that. But I mean, if you in the chat here, we have a lot of brilliant people with us, have any good ideas about how to counter internet shutdowns, we are constantly looking for inspiring ideas and people to solve that issue. So please, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add that, I mean, here in Mexico as well, community radio is still a very powerful medium for local communities and indigenous communities, and many places where there still isn't internet access, and sometimes things like electricity can also be a problem. I don't think by any means we are saying that internet access or access to online tools is a solution for anything. I think in many cases, many of these communities would rather not have access and are not interested in or are concerned, have their concerns about what coming online and access to the internet will mean for their communities and how that will change them. And I think we're interested in that as much as, you know, in building that power to think about and analyze and decide for ourselves what our future should be, what our communications future should be. So I think we're much interested in how movements have that conversation and engage in that conversation. And when these tools are introduced, you know, but whether the community is in agreement or not, you know, deciding, well, what actions can you take? What is available to you to do something about that, and to try to take back control of your communications.
Thank you all, and great, lots going on in the chat here. And I guess this brings me to another question on who is in charge of the digital economy, and what that means in terms of access to services, internet, softwares, and so on. Quoting Al Jazeera here, big tech corporations are wreaking havoc on the global south. There's a crisis in the tech ecosystem, and it's called digital colonialism. Basically control over how technology works, and forming the foundations of digital colonialism, similar to the architecture of classical colonialism. It's rooted in the design of the tech ecosystem for the purposes of profit and plunder. Can we have some of your thoughts on that? And I guess maybe how we can hold big tech corporations accountable, how we can build develop revolutionary movement-based technologies, and while doing so, maybe expand the conversation a little bit and shift it more towards diversity, intersectionality, and have the development of these resources grounded in political education and historical context.
I mean, we're trying is the best answer, and failing. So last week we took part in a big tech conference called Tech for Democracy, where prime ministers, big tech, NGOs and activists met together to discuss these issues and take action. And the next year will be a year of action, where we are actually, sadly having to engage with the big tech to also put pressure on them, because no matter how much we want to work through the grassroots and create these alternatives, there is also power and representation in these forums. And luckily enough, 𝗏𝗏 was in a great debate with the vice chairperson of Meta or Facebook, and really yelled at him, amongst others, around the genocide that Facebook was in part of either enhancing or letting happen in Myanmar, right? And I think the problem here is that the tech companies goes into these conferences with the same tensions all the time, right? Oh, we want regulation, we want rule, just give us clear rules and we'll follow those rules. And then it's up to the politicians, and the tech companies that are big enough, have these monopolies, can easily adapt. So what we are looking at is that we need different requirements for different steps, because the feminist collective in Nigeria developing an app, should we force them to create it open source? Should we force them to follow the same humanitarian standards as Facebook? Of course not, because then Facebook will just use it enormous resources and staying ahead. But we still need some standards developed on a global level. And right now, sadly, nation states are the place to go for those guidelines. And then some places like Denmark that are a bit more progressive can lead those talks. But at least that's on the high level advocacy part. And then of course we continue to do what we do here as activists from the grassroots, especially with the alternative services that is being developed. But it's going to take a long time, and they're going to earn billions while we're at it. I don't have a good solution.
Kaime and Stella, any thoughts here?
Mine is tentative. Mine is a tentative response. I think big tech, yes. Big tech, yes. But I think in Andrea's answer, he also talked about states. And I think part of the puzzle for me then is, for those of us who fall outside the states and don't have any negotiation power with big tech companies, where then do we go to negotiate for our own stakes, right? So if the internet platforms, if the digital world is owned and controlled by big tech companies or the state, Twitter switched off Trump, Twitter switched off the president of Nigeria. So those of us who operate against the state and are not looped into alternative digital organizing platforms where we have access to new, more inclusive, more democratized social media or internet tools, I think it's quite depressing, It's quite depressing because it sounds like we're not even pawns on a chessboard. I don't know what we are. and yet we want to utilize and tap into the power of technology and the internet. So I think it's quite depressing to be colonized and raped. It's yielding to rape by the state and big tech. So how does a raped entity get some autonomy and ability to fight back? I think that's where I am. How does one from such a position of powerlessness and nothingness, we are dependent on the oppressive, to the new beginnings of alternative technological digital innovations? How do we then survive? I don't know. It's quite depressing, but I don't like depression, and so I'm sure there are resistance platforms. They may be little, they may not be as big pharma out there starting and innovating, and I think the idea is to make them much more accessible, right? And to try and look into whatever alternatives there are. Otherwise it's quite depressing. I mean, sadly right now it's quite depressing. But there's a hand from Andreas. So
I just wanted to try, like, shortly to at least turn it into something less depressing, because I can see I started out a bad trend here. Sorry for that. But I think one of the things we can do is also own our, time and space, instead of us using all this energy on staying encrypted and safe and all this. Of course, we use those tools, but we recognize that either we can stay what we call like not flagging, not being of interest to state level actors. But as soon as we flag enough, as soon as we become interesting, we have just seen through the NSO Pegasus leak that they will just use the resources required to take full control of our phones, and then it doesn't matter what we do with them, right? So either we stay unobtrusive enough to not be targeted, or we don't own a mobile phone at all, both a smartphone and a dumb phone, or we own it and say, what Beautiful Trouble says, we do non-violent actions, we do colorful actions, we own the narrative. It's okay if they listen in, because we do rude poetry, so they can hear us speak our rude poetry to each other, right? We do colorful direct actions, we have the people behind us. And that is one of the great strengths of the non-violent action, the colorful actions, the creative actions, is that they, of course, don't need to be hidden. Sometimes you would like that surprise effect of your action, but you can plan around that. And if they expose you, we have an example from Zambia, right? Young people were protesting a year ago for free, and the regime sets in. Military and police that drive around the streets from the morning, and I'm sitting here in Denmark thinking, whoa, this is going to end badly. And they were there ready to catch the perpetrators, but instead the young people went through to the bush, like far out in the middle of nowhere. They turned on the internet, they streamed directly from the bush and said, like, look what we did. The police is protesting for us. They're protecting free speech. The regime sent police with heavy machine guns on the streets to protect the right of free speech. So they turned it around, right? And they used the knowledge that they were surveyed, that there would be a reaction to play against the regimes, instead of spending all of that energy and staying hidden. So, I mean, it's also about the jujitsu, as Beautiful Trouble talks about.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, it's important to recognize that all of this technology, into the internet, all of these things come from the centers of power, of capitalism, of patriarchy, of racism, and they are a colonizing force, but they're also they're sterile. A lot of times their best ideas they take from us, they take from the local movements, they take from the people from below, and historically it's this creative appropriation, where all of the ideas are coming from below. We're taking the limited, working within our limits and using technology in these unexpected ways, whether that be radio or things like the internet. It's the creative response from communities that really gives us our power. So if anything, we should be looking at, these companies are desperately trying to get more people online because they're running out of steam. They don't have anything more to do. They need more people. So in many ways, we can think of ourselves as we are the resources. Like that, it very much it follows the same pattern of capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, and looking for extending to other parts of the world to extract the last resources that are available. We are the communities all over the world who are disconnected are those last resources, and they then do have that power. They are rich in ideas and creativity and culture, which these companies desperately want to get hold of. So in one way, even though there's, definitely a situation of struggle and repression, we can't lose sight of that. It's like, we have our own solutions. We have the solutions. We are the creative force, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. It's something that we should be excited about.
This is perfect, and I like the direction we're going in. We're almost out of time and eager to open up the floor to questions as well. So maybe wrapping up, the last question can be, how can ordinary people really harness the power of digital direct action and exercise power online? And let's talk resistance, let's talk creative actions. There's some comments in the chats as well. I'd love to hear more examples of how people have done creative actions online.
Should I start? I'm looking at the two other panelists. Yeah, I'll give it a try. How can ordinary people? I don't think we have any ordinary people. We're all extraordinary, and we need to recognize that. So first off, if you think as yourself ordinary, change that view now and see yourself as extraordinary, and that will empower you to take change, right? And then we do what we do as activists and ordinary people. We fail forward. We practice and we make mistakes and we try again, and we practice and we make mistakes, and we do the same online. It might seem daunting, but we try some digital direct actions. It doesn't work out. We try another thing. The only mistake we can be here is to be afraid of our own power, because if we dare, we are all powerful. So I think that's the best suggestion. Just, type in something in Go and figure out where you go from there.
Stella and Kaime, closing thoughts on how extraordinary people can harness the power of digital direct action.
Well, I guess for me, it's still a learning experience, yeah. And I think what has helped me, because yes, I'm extraordinary, but many times I feel overwhelmed and the world of IT is very daunting. But what has helped is to partner with those who know, to collaborate and work with particularly younger activists who are tapped into encryption and decryption and what. And many times I don't know, working with others who are steps ahead in the digital world allows me to tap from what they know. And so I guess what I'm saying for ordinary folk who are not necessarily feeling extraordinary with tech, or feel a bit left behind, or feel incapacitated and don't even know how to start, one of the ways of becoming looped in is to sit with those who are the kings and queens of the digital world and learn from them, and also experiment. I think for me, experimentation. So I liked the reference to failing forward. Was it failing forward or failing? failing ahead, not giving up, because it's very experimental. It's, for me, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I think the other thing is, what's important, what I've learned, is to be cautious and conscious of the possibilities of also being disabled by repressive regimes while we are working online or with the internet. Because if we are not aware of the potential dangers, then as we're doing our work, we can be caught and stopped and put away for a bit of time to cool off and cool down, and then that affects our activism. So yeah, that's my input: to just be daring, work with others who may be knowing what to do, be experimental, but also be aware of potential dangers, which come not from because we are doing a criminal activity, but because those that hold power may want to criminalize our new modes of self-empowerment using technology. Sorry, I have to go early. I have to go now, but I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Stella, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really, really lovely having you here. Kaime, over to you for any thoughts on the last question.
Yeah, I think I just want to reinforce this idea that, you know, that our local struggles, our movements, we are the experts. There's value in our lived experiences, and that should be, you know, the driving force for the ideas that we bring to this. You know, the technical side of things, you know, if we can find someone to help with that, or we can learn about these things. We can, you know, there are people like us, like May 1st, we're trying to create the opportunities to learn and get involved in doing that work if people are interested in it. But I think it's important to, you know, to flip everything on its head and understand that, you know, that it's our intention, it's our local struggles that really hold the value, and so we need to be looking from within first, and always centering our movements and driving our needs, deciding how we should go about using technology and what we want to do with that.
Thank you both. And with that, I will open up the floor for a Q&A session. And if I could just ask everyone here, if you'd like to speak your question, that would be great. Please just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Alternatively, please use the chat box and we'll be keeping an eye on that and pulling out some questions from there. The floor is open. Please go ahead.
This is Chelsea with the Beautiful Trouble team. I just want to take a second and share the results of the poll that we took at the beginning of that segment, if that's okay, while folks are thinking of their questions. 107 people participated, which was really great. In the question, have you engaged in digital direct action? Here are the results. Can you see them on the screen? Okay. Thanks for the head nods, Andreas. Great.
Cool. Thanks, Chelsea. That's a nice mix. So I see some questions coming in the chat. So maybe we can start with that. Yusuf Munir is asking, what are some specific examples of digital direct actions that you've all found to be the most effective at disrupting state capitalist power?
That's a tricky question to answer, because I mean, many disrupting state and capitalist power is in many cases quite illegal, right? It's not just a smaller offense, it's a larger offense. So if we're talking about the not so illegal pieces, I mean, we had an activist in Berlin walking down the side road with a small pulling wagon behind him, and he had 100 smartphones in there on Google's maps, so it looked like 100 cars were traveling that road with him, and he did it like at the rush hour, so it looked like an additional 100 cars were there. And if you know Google Maps, it will then, if you are using it to drive around, it will redirect you to avoid traffic jams, right? And it looked like 100 cars were very slowly moving down one of the main streets in Berlin at rush hour, which means all traffic in Berlin was rerouted around that small red wagon on the sidewalk, and it totally blocked the city. And that was one person with a lot of old smartphones, right? So that's like a very, very interesting way to do blockades in capital cities, in larger cities. And then, I mean, the DDoS in Zimbabwe, shutting down the banks to get the regime to do something, that is kind of illegal. We've had great discussions because originally DDoSing is just getting your computer to look at a bank's website, right? More or less. And then you can do it many times very fast by using programs, and you can also buy others to do it very fast for you. And somewhere in that, from being an activist tool, it turned into like a bullying, a trolling tool, and now we're trying to reclaim it for activism. So it's also depending on how illegal is that. Is it like a sit-in where you use your own laptop and you say, it's me doing this against the mayor's office website? Or is it a botnet of door phones across the world, web-based door phones across the world shutting down the mayor's website, right? And then, of course, we have, I mean, the biggest disruption of capital was the Russian virus against Ukraine that got loose into the Maersk shipping company's own firmware and totally destroyed global shipping. I don't know how many billions were lost in that last year, but that's on quite another level.
Thanks, Andreas. And just putting out some more questions here from Stella. Could you say something about models of how to combine digital and non-digital communication in creative, autonomous ways? Comment there that my assumption is that we need multiple communication. Kaime or Andreas, please feel free to take this one.
Yeah, it's why I think we can think about a diversity of tactics in this, and there's certainly what we do in providing communications tools directly to movements and to the members of an organization like May 1st, where we're able to help back up those real world actions where people are able to share information about them or do creative actions that might otherwise draw the ire of the state and attempts to censor them. We are able, because we control our own servers, we're able to defend against those attempts of censorship. Also just keeping people's communications private and helping them be able to use email in a way that isn't surveilled immediately by the state and by corporate media. I think there's still something very powerful in that. It's not something that calls attention to itself so often until it does, until there's some attempt to get at that information, until the state does try to get at someone's information, is the moment when that suddenly those efforts become visible, where they'd previously been invisible. So I think there's a lot of different things that people are doing in terms of creating spoof websites where they try to create a satirical website to protest something that a specific company or state is doing, and that's something that we can help support. There's also, I mean, things like there's still a lot of different tactics where people are creatively using technology to do things like DDoS. I mean, I think it is a very different thing than when we are sort of, it is a mass movement. We were all sort of participating, and we can although we don't even have to know how it works. We can download a program and launch an attack against some specific site. When we do that collectively, I think it has a certain meaning, although nowadays it's, I think like Andres was mentioning, it's like there's much more of an industry built around that, where it's really, if you have enough resources, you can pay to attack using computers of other people who have been compromised. And that, I think, that it starts to go into a different territory, from my perspective at least. And definitely a lot of the targets that we would have, because they know more about this nowadays, they're able to use their resources to defend against those kind of attacks. I think it's, it's up to us to keep coming up with new creative ways to use these tools in ways that are unexpected. In a lot of ways, I think what Stella's experience and Stella's actions are, I thought, a great example of that. It's like, when just using what you have available, in this case, her own voice, and her poetry to bring attention to what's happening.
Thanks, Jaime. I see we have Rian's hand raised. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, that's correct, Rian.
Great. Please go ahead.
So I'm from the west of Ireland, and it's a really rural area, and we're quite a small country anyway. So one of the ways I've been involved in digital direct action is our system at the moment for dealing with asylum seekers is basically to segregate them from the rest of the society and leave them in this system where they're kind of left in limbo. It's only recently they've been allowed to gain the rights to work and stuff. So I've been raising money for individuals I know that are stuck in this system through just basically asking people on Instagram and hassling my friends to give me money to help individuals that I know. And through that now I've set up my own mutual aid fund, but I'm having issues with keeping the momentum going, because I think people care to donate or to help out once or twice, and then after that, it's kind of seen as a bother. And I'm just wondering, it's a two-part question. So basically, first I'm wondering, is there any tips that you guys have to keep the momentum going? And secondly, the other thing is people here are very apathetic. We come from a country where politicians rip us off left, right and center, and nobody wants to do anything about it. Or the perspective in this country is just to be like, sure, feck it, it's grand, it's fine, don't worry about it, yes, the politicians are completely corrupt, but there's nothing we can do about it. So due to this, it's kind of very hard to organize in person, especially coming from a rural area where there's small numbers of individuals that are spread apart. And I'm finding it very hard to bridge the gap between digital organizing and then kind of more in-person activism. So I'm just wondering if you've got any kind of tips or help with that as well.
I would love to take this one, because I think the tool we shared at the start would at least serve to your second question, right? How do we combat disenfranchisement caused by corruption at the leadership level and keeping us out of power, right? And having that movement matrix to have an idea of where are we right now. And it sounds like you are the oppression is there every day. There's no peak, there's no windows of opportunities. Then how do you prepare? You go in there, you click it, and there's tools and beautiful trouble to help you get started. And I think that I'll just come with a real world example, right? We're going to speak about Zambia again. 3 years ago, 2 young people founded Youth for Parliament, which wanted to get more young people across all political parties to engage in politics and to get more young people elected. And now after the elections in August, right, we have over 200 district councillors from Youth for Parliament across all political parties elected, right? We have 9 parliamentarian members. We have 7 mayors, for the first time mayors under the age of 35, women leading towns, large towns in Zambia, right? That's 3 years of dedicated organizing. The election percentage went up 21%, right? And this is voluntarily non-paid work done in a much more restrictive context than many of us faces, right? And this is dedication, it's strategizing. And I think I'll now try to answer the first part of your question, right? How do we keep people engaged? We do that by knowing when we campaign, because we have a long organizing stretch where we gather people, we build that dedication, we train ourselves, we strategize, and then we run campaigns during those long years where we have a peak of mobilization, get people to donate, get people to take action, get people to register as voters, get people to run for politicians, right? Simple mobilizing actions that we have a campaign. And if these campaigns run for years and years and years, we run out of steam, we burn out, we lose momentum, right? So for the last part of Youth for Parliament, some of them have worked 70 to 80 hours voluntarily a week for 20 months. That's a long campaign up to a presidential election, right? But if we had kept that going for 3 years, they would have died. Now it was almost 2, it was too long, but they managed to succeed in having a great victory there. And now steam is turned down, but they're not stopping. Now they're building the movement again. And I would love to talk more about this at another event around how we combine organizing and mobilizing, especially using the movement compass that beautiful Trouble just shared. I hope that answered part of the question, and you're more than welcome, and the rest of you also, to reach out afterwards if you would like to take these conversations on the sideline.
Maybe I'll channel in one more question as well from the chat. I'm interested in tools that are not so much crowdfunding, where the intermediary collects data and can turn them on whatever tools are less traceable to transfer money that are accessible to activists. Sorry, I think I may not be reading this correctly, but would Vale like to ask that question? Are you here with us? So basically, I think the question is how to get money to folks and how to donate without being tracked. Kaime, maybe this one is for you.
I'm not so sure. This is not my area of expertise. I'm imagining the question is related to how to donate money over long distances. You know, locally, the best thing is just to to show up and to see what someone needs directly and figure out what's the shortest method of supporting that need. But definitely remotely, then we enter into all kinds of problems of how do we get resources to someone. And I think it's always a great attempt to think about it creatively. What is, ask people what is really needed, and is there any other way to get that support that is not trying to transfer monetary resources? But a lot of times it does. I guess it simply comes down to that. It's like, sometimes we need resources to organize our movements, and sometimes we do need monetary resources to do that. So I think, I'm not an expert about how we can transfer those resources. There's all kinds of things with cryptocurrencies and such. It's I don't know. It's kind of a problematic area. That it used to be clear that that it could be used if you were able to make a quick use something like a cryptocurrency and make that transfer and immediately be able to exchange that for the actual resources that you needed, then it was a much more clear cut. There's a lot of speculation around it, and there's a lot of different types. So I don't know. I think I don't have a clear answer for that. It does feel like something that where we need more work. There's definitely been more work recently in terms of trying to build platforms, especially we could see during the pandemic and during some natural disasters where people have taken free software platforms, things like 𝗓𝗓 and then repurpose them to try to reach out and see, like, a network where the possibilities to see where certain resources are needed and kind of localize those geographically and figure out how we can work through networks of people to get resources to those people, using just real networks of people, not thinking specifically about just like transfers of funds. And I think that's interesting work, and that's something we should continue, is thinking about how do we as movements use the tools available to us to respond to emergencies and to disasters in that way.
I think
someone is making a good suggestion. Oh, it's Andreas. Go ahead, Andreas, please.
I think the last part of the answer is really the correct part to answer this, because we just took part in a ActionAid, or I representing ActionAid, just took part in a funding mapping exercise. How do we transfer funds over large distances without them being traceable, especially to places that need them, Myanmar, Gaza, other areas that are closed down, and we don't. It is simply impossible to do that untraceable in a decent format, because places that need funds cannot exchange crypto. Nobody in Myanmar right now wants to buy crypto to get the activists we want real money in their hands, right? So there is, the best solution is money in your pants and on an airplane, or money in your pants and on a car, or get a lot of your friends together in that area and get them to put the money there, and you transfer the funds. Get some business owners to hand out cash, invest in that business. I mean, the old school ways are still the ways to do a large amount of transfers of funds. But firefund.net, I shared the link, is activists that we know that have created a safe platforms to donate for a multitude of activist causes, and they can then transfer all the funds you collect there to somebody that they can then handle them, cash them out, transport them, whatever way you wanna go with these funds. It's almost free compared to GoFundMe or the other pages out there.
Thank you, Jaime and Andres. Another question is, how do you, any of you, reconcile the aims and or ends of digital direct action with the fact that social media platforms themselves are complicit in the very things we're mobilizing against, vis-a-vis surveillance capitalism?
I mean, I think we don't try to reconcile that. When movements are using social media, it's because it's out of necessity, and it's out of and this has always been the case of the appropriation of the dominant powers tools, and for that sense, and at the same time we're trying to build alternatives to using those social media. So we are, at May 1st, we administrate our own servers, and we provide our own communications tools for email, and tools for hosting your own website, and tools for chat, and for video conferencing, alternatives to Zoom. We aren't, but yeah, I think that the other side, and I wouldn't say that, I think many movements are more and more conscious of the cost of using social media and what that implies. And I think we're very much interested in thinking about how do we begin to bridge those worlds where people can use the alternatives and also use the, as they need to use social media to reach a wider audience. Like, how do they balance both of those things, and develop a strategy in thinking about that?
I think it's a perfect answer. I don't have anything to add.
We have another question. Somebody would like to find out if there are specific tools to use in carrying out good research and using the data subsequently.
Yes, there are some amazing tools for collecting masses of data scraping websites and analyzing them. And a couple of them are free. I was just thinking about what the name is of that amazing tool. I'll post the link in the chat in a while. So it's also been created open source. So it's a way to parallel search large amount of data. It was used to, amongst other things, identify that the drone missiles that the US used were not as precise as they said they were, by analyzing masses of leaked files. It's used as the foundation for WikiLeaks search engine. It's used for scraping LinkedIn for military contractors, mercenaries, stuff like that. But I simply cannot remember the name right now. I need to look through my bookmarks, but it's out there, it's open source, and it's easy to point it at data sources that are available at the net and then use it to search for the data entries you are looking for. Also, for example, cases of corruption. We know in Nigeria, a large network identifying buildings not being built by government funds are using it, where they source all the data, then they post it to local activists that go to the places without internet, take pictures, go back to the internet, and upload photos of unbuilt schools where the government have donated or allocated money for built schools. So that's also a way to link the digital with the very practical and ensure that these two play together to identify where the on what level does the corruption happen. Is this government? Is it a local region? Is this mayoral? Is it contractor? Yeah, I'll post the link in a second.
I think we have time for one more question. If anyone would like to unmute and go ahead. Or please feel free to type it in the chat. Okay, well, if any questions arise, you know where to find us. We'll be sharing some links where you can get in touch with us at Beautiful Trouble or any of the speakers here today, Andreas and Kaime. And I think that with that, we've come to an end of this program. It's been really great speaking with you all. Thank you, Kaime and Andreas, for joining us today and for what has been a beautiful discussion with you and Stella. I'd like to thank everybody else for joining in and for your input in the chat. I hope that you've enjoyed this as much as I have. You rock. Nice. Thanks, Toby.
Thank you for having me here. It's been a great pleasure to be allowed to participate. And please, all of you, you're more than welcome to reach out for further talks around organizing digital stuff and all of this. I would be more than happy to support any of you.
Yes, thanks, Darya. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, all of you, for being here. Thank you for having me here today. Likewise, if anyone's interested in more about May 1st and the work we do, there is the link. Just put it in the chat. I'd be happy to talk to anyone. Thank you so much.
And just before everybody drops out, it would be great if you could, if you're comfortable, to turn your cameras on and we can take a few screenshots. That would be super. Chelsea, could you help with that, please?
All right, everyone, on the count of three, I'm going to take a bunch. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Lots of waves and smiles. It's so great. Woo!
I have to remove the spot. Let me remove the other spotlight. There you go.
It's all
now
good.
You can everybody.
Keep smiling, keep waving. Yay. Thanks so much, everyone. Got it. Have a great day.
We'll put up a slide
Thank
with
you,
other
everyone.
contact info.
And this recording will be available to view and to share. And yeah, please do reach out to us for any thoughts or questions. You know where to find us. Have a good evening, good day, good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you.